in the Superior Court of the State of Arizona in and for the County of Maricopa. State of Arizona versus Elizabeth Johnson. Indictment. CR 2010-101760. Count 1, kidnapping, dangerous crime against children and a domestic violence offense. Count 2, conspiracy to commit custodial interference, a domestic violence offense. Count 3, custodial interference, a domestic violence offense. The grand jurors of Maricopa County accuse Elizabeth Johnson on this 14th day of January 2010, charging that in Maricopa County, Arizona, count 1, Elizabeth Johnson, on or between the 18th day of December 2009 and the 30th day of December 2009, knowingly restrained Gabriel S. Johnson, under 15 years of age, with the intent to place Logan McQueary in reasonable apprehension of imminent physical injury to Gabriel Johnson in violation of Arizona law. Count 2, Elizabeth Johnson, on or between the 18th day of December 2009 and the 26th day of December 2009, did conspire to commit the offense of custodial interference. In conspiring to commit such offense, Elizabeth Johnson and other conspirators, both known and unknown, with the intent to promote or aid the commission of an offense, did agree with one or more persons that at least one of them or another person would engage in conduct constituting the offense of custodial interference. In furtherance of this conspiracy and to effect the objects therefore, defendant and other co-conspirators, both known and unknown, would commit overt acts in violation of Arizona law. Count 3, Elizabeth Johnson, on or between the 18th day of December 2009 and the 26th day of December 2009, removed Gabriel S. Johnson from Arizona, knowing or having reason to know that she had no legal right to do so, took, enticed, or kept from lawful custody Gabriel S. Johnson, a child who was entrusted by authority of the law to the custody of Logan McQueary in violation of Arizona law. A true bill dated January 14, 2010. Andrew Thomas, Maricopa County Attorney, signed by Bell Whitney, Deputy County Attorney, and signed by the foreperson of the grand jury, to which the defendant has pled not guilty as to each count alleged. So, Ms. Ramuno, you may proceed with the state's opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In a matter of 3 weeks' time, the lives of Logan McQueary and Gabriel Johnson were forever altered by the fury of a woman scorned and by the obsession and meddling of a woman by the name of Tammy Smith. This case is about the quest to remove Logan McQueary from the life of his child, Gabriel Johnson, at the hands of two women. One woman intent on adopting a child or getting a child without regard to the rights of the father, and one woman intent on retaliation. A combination that resulted in the complete disregard for the right of a father to raise his child, the complete disregard for the right of a child to be raised by his father, and a complete disregard for the legal system. A combination that resulted in disaster. This is Elizabeth Johnson and Logan McQueary. They knew each other from grade school at a young age and became a couple in the year 2007. In the year 2008, they learned that they were pregnant and were going to be having a child. Like any other relationship, the relationship had its ups and downs, they tried to make it work, especially after the birth of their son, Gabriel Johnson, on May 3rd, 2009. However, there came a point in the relationship when it became clear that the relationship was on a decline and the fate of this young family was uncertain. The first sign of big trouble came in June of 2009. Logan and Elizabeth had gotten into an argument, and in response to that argument, The defendant, Elizabeth Johnson, left the state of Arizona with her child Gabriel without Logan's knowledge. After a couple days, he realized that she was in Boston visiting her grandmother. During that trip, they reconciled over the phone. She flew back to the state of Arizona. And it was a fateful day in June of 2009 that she met a woman by the name of Tammy Smith on a layover in Indianapolis, both on their way back to the state of Arizona. They met, they talked, the topic of adoption came up. Tammy Smith was interested in adding another child to her family. She was not able to have any more children. And Elizabeth had a child that she told Tammy Smith she was willing to consider giving up for adoption. Tammy Smith gave her phone number at that time in the hopes that Elizabeth would call her and that she could adopt Gabriel Johnson. However, Elizabeth returned to the state of Arizona, and her and Logan resumed their life as normal. And during the months of June through December 2009, they lived together. And as of December 2009, they lived together in a home in Tempe, Arizona. However, on the date of December 8th, 2009, Logan and the defendant got into another argument, and Logan had had enough. He ended their relationship that day, and in response, the defendant told him, "Leave the house and take the baby with you." So he did. Immediately that day, he went to his grandmother's home and visited with her. A few hours later, however, he's contacted by the Tempe Police Department because the defendant had called them and reported that her child had been missing and that Logan had taken him without her permission. As soon as he hears this, he takes the baby immediately back, leaves Gabriel Johnson with Elizabeth Johnson at the home in Tempe. On this very same day, Elizabeth Johnson contacts Tammy Smith about adopting Gabriel Johnson. On this very day, December 8th, 2009, this is the last time Logan McQueary ever saw his son. Because as of December 9th, 2009, Elizabeth notified him that she intended on giving up the baby for adoption. In fact, he was made aware when she called him and said that he needed to sign the adoption papers. He told her he was not interested, that he did not want to give Gabriel up for adoption, that he wanted to take care of him himself. However, the defendant had already taken action on her plan. That very same day, as of 1 p.m., she had given Gabriel Johnson to the Smith family, Tammy and Jack Smith. She had also signed over a guardianship document giving them legal authority over that child, totally unbeknownst to Logan McQueary. He goes to work that day. She starts calling. Different clerks and employees are answering the phone. He doesn't go to the phone because they're in an argument. He doesn't want to create a disturbance at work. 6:41 p.m., she shows up. And she wants to deal with the issue of the adoption right then and there. She demands that he signs paperwork. She demands that they talk about the issue while he's at work at the 99-cent store. However, she creates such a disturbance at that 99-cent store that one of the managers calls the Tempe Police Department. The Tempe Police Department comes over. When they come over at about 6:45 p.m., Elizabeth Johnson again claims that Gabriel Johnson is missing, that Logan has kidnapped him, taken him, and is responsible for the unknown whereabouts of Gabriel Johnson. All while knowing the whole time that Gabriel Johnson is just fine at the Smith residence. Over the course of the next several hours, Logan and his family members that are located here in Arizona are questioned by the police. The police go to their homes to check if the baby is there. They go to the home in Tempe where they had previously lived together. The baby's not there. After several hours of questioning and investigation, Elizabeth finally says, "Oh, okay, he is at the Smith residence." Tempe Police Department goes out to the Smith residence. They find that Gabriel is there. He is fine. He is safe. And they are provided with the guardianship document that she had signed earlier that day. In the meantime, Logan is left without knowing where his son is. Because he has not established legal paternity over the child, because they were not married and he did not establish paternity, the police are prevented from giving him much information on where the child is, because the legal custodian at that time is Elizabeth Johnson. So despite the fact that he's cared for this child for most of his life, that he's the only father this child has ever known, he does not know where his child is. He does not know the Smith family. He has no clue who these people are. After discussing what his next steps should be with his family and his father in particular, Logan McQueary decides to take proper legal action. And he goes to the Maricopa County Superior Court and he files for legal custody of his child. A hearing date is set for later in the month. And on that same day, the defendant is visited by Alicia Shumway of Children's Protective Services of the state of Arizona. When asked to see Gabriel, Elizabeth tells Miss Shumway, "Well, he's not here. I gave him up for adoption. He's with this family, the Smith family." Miss Shumway is concerned at that point, obviously, because she needs to check on the welfare of this child. She sets up an appointment for a couple days later to come back and see Gabriel and make sure that he's safe. On December 11, 2009, Elizabeth Johnson also posts to an unknown user on MySpace that she has given up the child for adoption. During this time, over the next couple days, Elizabeth begins to move on with her life. She posts an ad on Craigslist looking for a roommate. She finds a roommate, a man by the name of Malcolm Phipps, who comes and moves into the home on or about December 12, 2009. As of December 13, 2009, Logan McQueary is still letting the defendant know that he wants to take care of Gabriel. He posts on her MySpace, "I want to take care of Gabriel. Let's not do this. Give him to me. Don't give him up." On December 14th of 2009, Ms. Shumway from CPS appears at the Tempe home where Elizabeth is with Gabriel Johnson, and this time Tammy Smith is there with her. Ms. Shumway explains to her that this adoption is not possible because legal proceedings have been begun in Maricopa County Superior Court, and until that's resolved or until Logan McQueary signs away his rights, they can't do anything. She sternly tells them that, and at this time Elizabeth Johnson changes her story and says, "Oh no, I never intended, I'm not giving him up for adoption." At that point, Ms. Shumway leaves, and Gabriel is allowed to go back home with Miss Smith, contrary to the instructions of Miss Shumway from CPS. He doesn't stay at the home with Elizabeth. He goes back home to the Smiths. December 15th, 2009. Logan McQueary continues to plead with Elizabeth. He posts another message on her MySpace wall about him wanting to be able to take care of the child, to let him try and do it, to let him do it. On December 16th, 2009, the day before the court hearing, Elizabeth and Logan meet up. And they discuss a custody arrangement between the two of them that they agree upon. And they reconcile, but only for the night. When they show up in court next day, Judge McVeigh declares that Logan is the father of the child and that he orders joint custody between the two parties. He also orders that Logan is entitled to his first visitation on the dates of December 20th to 23rd, 2009. On this date, Gabriel's still in the custody of the Smiths, but on the 20th, Logan McQueary is supposed to get him. However, on Friday, December 18th, 2009, 2 days before Logan McQueary is scheduled to have his son, Elizabeth Johnson clears her bank accounts and leaves the state of Arizona with Gabriel Johnson, and no one knows where she is. By Sunday, December 20th, Logan figures out that something's gone awry. He goes over to the house, knocks on the door, no one answers. Elizabeth's not there, the baby's not there. She doesn't have a cell phone at the time. He doesn't have a way of getting in contact with her. He spends the next few days repeatedly going back to the trailer, trying to figure out where she is, and in a state of disarray because he has no idea where she is and where his son is. On December 21st, then, he goes back to court and he lets the judge know what has happened. The judge orders temporary full custody to be given to Logan McQueary. He also orders a hearing to be held on December 28, 2009, at which time Elizabeth Johnson is expected to appear with the child. On this same date, he calls the Tempe Police Department to assist him in trying to locate the whereabouts of Elizabeth Johnson and or his son. Between the dates of December 21st and 22nd, 2009, Logan McQueary finds a number for Tammy Smith. It's a business number, and he calls her. And after a few conversations, it becomes apparent that Tammy Smith has been in contact with Elizabeth Johnson, and that Elizabeth Johnson is in the state of Texas. While they give Logan McQueary Elizabeth Johnson's phone number, her and her husband, Jack, talk to her and tell him not to call her, to let them handle the situation. They also talk to him about possibly adopting Gabriel and discuss the benefits of doing so. Despite these people being strangers, despite him not knowing anything about them, he decides to listen to their advice at that time, and he doesn't call Elizabeth for the next few days. However, he is very uncomfortable after speaking with the Smiths and the things that they have to say to him. December 22nd, 2009, Logan hears from Elizabeth Johnson via MySpace. She posts a message to him, clearly indicating that she's upset about the demise of their relationship. However, he only hears from her via MySpace that day. The same day, Tammy Smith text messages Logan McQueary and suggests that they get together, her and her husband and him and his dad, to talk about Elizabeth Johnson. She also suggests or tells him that she doesn't trust you or your dad. The only way she'll come back is if my attorney faxes the signed papers to her so she won't get in trouble and Gabriel be with us. Essentially leveraging the adoption of Gabriel Johnson against the idea of never seeing Elizabeth or Gabriel Johnson again. He tells Tammy Smith and her husband he's not interested in adoption and to stop calling him and not bring it up again. By December 26, 2009, Logan McQueary can't take it anymore, and he decides to call Elizabeth Johnson. At about 12 p.m. that day, they talk for about 4 or 5 minutes. The very next day, December 27, 2009, Logan McQueary hears from Elizabeth Johnson in a text that changes his world forever. She texts him, "I killed him." He immediately calls her, speaks to her for about 1 minute and 37 seconds, and again calls her back and speaks to her for about 9 minutes and 11 seconds. And during these conversations, Logan McQueary hears from Elizabeth Johnson that she has killed their son, that she has suffocated him, that she has stuffed him in a bag, put him in a dumpster, described horrific acts to Logan McQueary, and then blames it on him and tells him that it's his fault she did it and that he made her do it. Obviously, Logan goes to the police. He shows them his phone. He shows them the text message. He gives them a recorder that contains the recording of these phone calls. Because a few weeks earlier, his father, Frank McQueary, had told him, "You should probably start taping your interactions with these people," because he was afraid of what might happen. Everything was up in the air. There were different things being said back and forth. So he provides that to the police. While he's at the police station, his phone is dying, however, so he had to shut it off. And at about 12:40 that afternoon, he turns his phone back on again to show the police the text message, and he receives additional text messages that were made earlier by Elizabeth Johnson. She calls him a coward bitch. She says, pathetic loser, run to daddy. She says, you will never find me. I'm already boarding a plane out of the country. When I'm safe, I'll email you the exact location of dead Gabriel's little blue body. If the garbage does not come first, well, I'm done with you two fucks. This is what liars like you deserve. Based on the dire nature of these text messages and the conversations that the police heard, the Tempe Police Department immediately takes action. They send officers out to the home in Tempe. After a while, the roommate, Malcolm Phipps, shows up. He hasn't seen Elizabeth in a while. He's never seen the baby live at that address. When he first moved in, there were baby items there, or when he first looked at the house, there were baby items there, but by the time he moved in the next day, there were no baby items there whatsoever. They contact the Smiths. The Smiths don't have the baby. They finally get a hold of the defendant on her cell phone. She says, yeah, I'm in the state of Texas. I'm on my way back to Arizona. The baby's in the car. We're fine. No baby's heard in the background. They ask her to pull over on the interstate so that a San Antonio officer can come check on their welfare, and she refuses to do so. Based on this information, based on the text, the phone calls, her refusal to pull over and let Texas authorities know that the baby's okay, a nationwide search is begun at this time. Quickly, the San Antonio Police Department become involved, the FBI becomes involved, all on the lookout for Elizabeth Johnson and her son Gabriel. Over the next day, the whole day of December 27, 2009, the Tempe Police Department are able to track the defendant's movement via her cell phone, a cell phone that she had obtained with a San Antonio phone number. However, her movement clearly indicates she's not heading back towards Arizona, she's heading towards Houston, the complete opposite direction. All contact with her is lost at the end of the day on December 27, 2009, and it's not until December 30th, 2009, several days later, that they are able to track her and find her in Miami Beach, Florida. On December 29th, 2009, what happens is she uses her MySpace account. She actually uses it to write to Tammy Smith. Search warrants are issued, and they track the computer that she used down to a hostel in the Miami Beach area. When they arrive in the Miami Beach area, the Miami Beach police are given flyers of what she looks like, and they immediately begin a search of the area, particularly going directly to the hostel where this message came from. She's eventually found under an assumed name of Victoria Evans, and Gabriel is nowhere to be found. Surveillance tapes are reviewed, witnesses are spoken to. The last time anyone has seen Gabriel Johnson was in the state of Texas on or about December 26th or 27th, 2009. On December 27th, 2009, in particular, she goes to a bus station in San Antonio, Texas. Witnesses there observe that she has no baby, she just has a backpack. She gets on that bus, which takes her to Miami Beach, Florida. You will hear that she was then questioned by Miami Beach police detective, and she was also questioned by a special agent from the FBI on between the dates of December 30th and 31st, 2009. And what she tells them at that time is that, oh, Gabriel's fine. She gave him to a couple, an unknown couple, a strange couple, was not able to provide any description that led to an identification of a couple, any description that would be able to lead to the whereabouts of Gabriel Johnson. And for her actions over the course of the dates of December 18th through December 30th, 2009, the defendant is charged with 3 counts. She is charged with kidnapping, custodial interference, and conspiracy to commit custodial interference. The evidence in this case, during this trial, you will hear from a number of witnesses. You're going to hear from Logan McQueary. You're going to hear in his own words about the events that took place during this time period. He's going to tell you how everything went down. You're going to hear from his father. You're going to hear from people who know Tammy Smith. You're going to hear from a number of police officers who were involved in this investigation. And I'm not going to give you all their names because there's just far too many at this point. You're going to hear from the FBI agent who spoke to her. You're going to hear from the Miami Beach detective who spoke to her. You're going to see the court documents and records that granted a legal custody to Logan McQueary. You're going to see the text messages, the pictures on the phone, the text records, the phone records. You're going to hear the conversations that occurred between Tammy Smith, Logan McQueary, and the defendant in this case. What you will not hear, however, is evidence of where Gabriel Johnson is now. And the judge has already instructed you that that is not an issue for you to consider in this case, and that you are not to speculate on that. We don't have any information to give you about where he is. However, it is your job in this case to decide the facts and apply it to the law with regard to the charges that the defendant is charged with. And what that evidence will show is that for the co-defendant Tammy Smith in this case, Gabriel Johnson was an object to be desired. He was something she wanted to add to her family. And because of that, she agreed upon a plan with Elizabeth Johnson, and she took action in that plan in order to keep Gabriel Johnson away from Logan McQueary. And what you will hear, the evidence in this case will show, with regard to the defendant Elizabeth Johnson, is that Gabriel Johnson was a pawn. He was a tool. He was a piece in a game. And the object of that game to her was to keep Gabriel Johnson from Logan McQueary, was to retaliate against Logan McQueary for breaking up with her. And her intent was also to place him in fear for the safety of his son. And in each of those women's different motivations or desires in obtaining Gabriel Johnson, crimes were committed. Crimes that have irreparable consequences. And at the end of this case, after you hear all the evidence and you consider all the evidence, you will have more than enough evidence to find the defendant guilty as charged. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ramuno. Mr. Victor?
Thank you, Judge. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You made it on the jury, and congratulations for that. I know it's been a very long process, lots of delays, lots of sort of probing questions. Some of them may be embarrassing or uncomfortable, but I want to thank you for serving. And let me start with a piece of good news. My opening statement's going to be very brief. Much briefer than the state's. Now, I know that already that you are not surprised to learn that there's going to be evidence in this case that may cause you to not like Elizabeth Johnson. I know you're not surprised about that. I also know that you're not surprised to learn that there may be evidence in this case that would suggest that Baby Gabriel is still missing. I know you remember that I sort of tipped you off to this, maybe not so subtly, on Tuesday of this week, when I addressed the entire panel. I sort of made it clear that there was going to be evidence in this case about that. And I know you recall that I asked questions about whether or not you would be able, notwithstanding these issues, to focus on the elements of the crimes charged. What I'm going to ask you to do is listen to all the evidence, but to keep that in mind. to keep in mind as you hear the evidence that really it's about focusing on the elements of the crimes charged. Now, you may be surprised to know that there's really not very much of a dispute over the facts of what happened here. In fact, the defense agrees with much, if not all, of the facts that will be presented in this case. The defense isn't going to dispute at any time that there was a bad relationship between Elizabeth Johnson and Logan McQueary. We're not going to dispute that there were fights about lots of things, fights about Gabriel especially. We're not going to dispute that Elizabeth Johnson wanted to give Gabriel up for adoption and that Logan McQueary didn't want to do that. We won't dispute that Tammy Smith wanted to adopt Gabriel. No dispute in this case about that. No dispute that Tammy Smith sort of undertook some actions, even to forge some documents. She was desperate to get Gabriel Johnson into her hands. There's not going to be any dispute about that from the defense in this case. Indeed, there is very little to no dispute about the timeline of events in this case. We agree that somewhere around December 18 of 2009, possibly December 19 of 2009, Elizabeth Johnson left the state of Arizona. She took Gabriel. She went to Texas. However, you're not going to hear any evidence that there was anything wrong with that. Indeed, Elizabeth Johnson was entitled to take Gabriel Johnson wherever she wanted at that point in time. She wasn't violating any order whatsoever on that day. That notwithstanding, on December 20th, 2009, as you've heard, there was an order, and you're going to hear evidence about that order that Judge McVeigh issued from the Maricopa County Superior Court that says on December 20th, 2009, that Elizabeth Johnson was obligated to return Gabriel Johnson to Logan McQueary, to give him to Logan McQueary. The evidence is going to be that Elizabeth Johnson didn't do that. Elizabeth Johnson was in Texas on that day. She failed to give Gabriel to Logan on that day. There's not going to be a dispute on that point. 12/26/2009 is the last day that we have any evidence whatsoever of Elizabeth Johnson being with Gabriel Johnson. You're going to hear evidence that this was at the Homegate Hotel in Texas, in San Antonio. Now, Elizabeth Johnson gave conflicting accounts of what happened with Gabriel in Texas, to Gabriel in Texas. That's not going to be resolved in this case. Indeed, that's not even an issue in this case. You've heard the judge already say, you've heard me already say, the judge will say it again, I'll say it again, Gabriel's current status, Gabriel's whereabouts is simply not an issue in this case. That's the 800-pound gorilla in the corner that I was sort of referring to the other day. We know that you may speculate about that issue, but you've already heard the judge tell you, you've already heard me say it, we'll both say it again. You're just not allowed to speculate about that issue. It can't be any part of your decisions in this case. 12/27/2009, approximately 10:15 in the morning. Elizabeth Johnson is at the Tornado bus station in Texas. You're going to hear evidence about that. You're going to hear evidence that Elizabeth Johnson was there alone. Gabriel was not with her at that point. You're going to hear that Elizabeth bought one bus ticket to Florida at the bus station so she could travel to Florida. Gabriel is not with her at that point. There's going to be no dispute on that point. About an hour and a half later, a little bit more than that, 11:53 a.m., same day, 12/27/2009, you've already heard about the text. We're not going to dispute that text. She sent it. It said, "I killed him." There's not going to be a dispute about that. That's the text that Elizabeth Johnson sent to Logan McQueary on December 27, 2009 at 11:53 a.m. Immediately following that, just like you heard from the state, there's going to be evidence about it. Defense is not going to dispute it. There was a telephone conversation recorded by Logan McQueary that allegedly gave details about what had happened to Gabriel McQueary. Those are the inflammatory type details that you just heard. You're going to hear that. We don't dispute it. There's a bus that left the Tornado bus station on that day, some period of time after noon, after that text message is sent, after those phone calls, those recorded calls are made. And Elizabeth Johnson starts her journey to Florida. We don't know exactly what happens at that point. But we do know on December 30th, 2009, that's the date that Elizabeth Johnson is found. She's found in Miami Beach, Florida. We don't dispute that either. She's arrested in Florida. No Gabriel. No evidence of any Gabriel. She's alone. She then talks to the police. Police ask her the obvious questions. Where's Gabriel? We're looking for Gabriel. We heard you killed Gabriel. Where's Gabriel? She responds, I didn't kill Gabriel. She tells the police a different version of events. She explains that she gave Gabriel to a couple in the San Antonio Park, back in Texas. She gives some limited details about that couple. Limited details about the park, where it is, what it looks like, what the streets are like on the way. That's not an issue in this case. You may hear other evidence in this case as we go through this trial. You're going to hear lots of other pieces of evidence. Things that go to things like, was Elizabeth Johnson a good mom? You've already heard some pieces of evidence about that. You may already have an opinion about whether or not Elizabeth Johnson was a good mom. You're going to hear other pieces of evidence as we go through this trial. Was Elizabeth Johnson a good girlfriend to Logan McQueary? Did she say mean things? Did she lie about Logan kidnapping Gabriel Johnson? I'm going to ask you over and over again to focus on the elements of the crimes that are charged. And I'm going to ask you to think about whether or not these issues, these things that I just discussed, have anything to do with those elements of those crimes. That's what I'm going to be talking to you about. This case isn't about whether or not you like Elizabeth Johnson. It doesn't matter to me whether you like Elizabeth Johnson or not. My job is to do my best to get you to focus on the elements of the crimes charged. Indeed, that is your job. I'm going to ask you simply to do your job in this case. Nothing more and nothing less. I'm going to ask you not to be distracted. There are lots of distractions in this case. In case you haven't noticed. Lots of distractions. There's going to be lots of distractions as we go through this case. I'm going to ask you not to be distracted. There's going to be emotion in this case. I'm going to ask you to do something that might be difficult. To not make a decision based on your emotions. You already know from jury selection, this isn't about emotions. This isn't about speculations. That's going to be the difficult part of my job as we're going through the case. I'm going to ask you to do those things. Indeed, you have a duty not to do those things. The judge will give you the law at the end. The judge is going to tell you that it's only about the elements of the crimes charged. Now, there are going to be witnesses as we go through this case. In a criminal case, generally we have lots of witnesses. Some of them are there to do things, as we like to say as lawyers, to sort of complete the story. It's not fair to give you little bits and pieces of only just the relevant information. You have a right to hear the entire story of what happened, and we understand that. So you're going to hear witnesses along those lines. I'm going to tell you right now, so you'll know as we're going through the case, the defense isn't concerned about those witnesses. The defense isn't concerned about those issues. The defense is concerned only with facts and evidence that go to one thing, the elements of the crimes charged. So there may not be much cross-examination in this case. As much as I like to do cross-examination, there may not be much. There may be some witnesses with no cross-examination whatsoever at all. State may finish some witnesses, And the judge may say, Mr. Victor, your turn for cross-examination, and I may say no questions. Other witnesses, I may have very few questions on. I am not going to take your time with issues that don't go to the elements of the crimes charged. I'm going to ask you to keep an open mind. The judge has already told you in the preliminary jury instructions that's part of what you're required to do here today. I'm going to ask you not to speculate about those things I know you want to speculate about. I'm going to ask you not to speculate about the current status or the whereabouts of Gabriel Johnson. And I'm going to ask you to remember, this is not a case about whether or not you like Elizabeth Johnson. And at the end, when I come back here in closing argument, which I promise you will be much, much longer than my opening statement, I can assure you of that, I'm going to ask you to do what I'm telling you I would like you to do right now. Focus on the elements of the crimes charged. I'm going to come back in closing argument, and I'm going to walk you through each element of each crime. And I'm going to review the evidence with you. And I'm going to say, did the state present evidence to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt of each element of each crime? That's what your job is. I'm not going to ask you to do anything more or anything less than that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Victor. Okay.
For the record.
Logan, McQueary.
Please raise your right hand. You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
Come on around. You're going to go around the court reporter and sit right next to me here. Okay, Ms. Andrews, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Logan, why don't you go ahead and make sure that microphone is pulled up close to you? Yeah. Good morning.
Morning.
Would you tell us all your name?
Logan Scott McQueary,
How old are you, Logan?
27.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your family? Who's in your family?
I got a little brother and little sister and an older sister, and then my father, and then also have nieces and nephews.
And in December of 2009, what family members did you have living here in Arizona?
Pretty much my whole family, aunts and uncles, my grandmother. I have multiple aunts and uncles, and the only two I believe that were, I have a few that live out of state, but most of my whole family lives here.
Tell us your dad's name.
Frank McQueary?
And does your dad have a girlfriend?
Yes.
What's your dad's girlfriend's name?
Jamie?
Does Jamie have any kids?
Yes.
And who are her kids?
Jordan and Matt?
How old are they? Are they adults?
Yes, they're my age.
And tell us about your mom.
My mother passed away 4 years ago.
And tell us about your grandmother.
My grandmother lives here in the valley. She lives up in North Scottsdale, and we're real close.
Logan, I'm going to ask you to try and speak up a little bit more, okay? I want to talk to you a little bit about your criminal history. You have a criminal history, is that correct?
Yes.
And in fact, on July 14th, 2007, did you commit a crime that they determined to be solicitation to commit burglary?
Yes.
And were you sentenced for that crime on March 23rd, 2005?
Yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that was about?
Tell what happened, or?
Yes, what happened?
A friend and I, pretty much, we were drinking alcohol, and we went to go get more alcohol, and then he went and he wanted to look in vehicles, and I was driving the car, and he got out, and I didn't know exactly what he was doing, but he went and checked in a vehicle and stole some property from it and ran back to the car.
And when the police investigated that, did you assist the police at all?
Yes.
And how did you assist them?
Returned the property to which car it belonged to, what house.
And did you eventually take a plea agreement to that?
Yes.
And was that for a Class 6 felony that if you did well on probation, you could earn a misdemeanor?
Yes.
And In February of 2009, did you violate that probation?
Yes.
And what did you do to violate that probation?
I absconded,
And how did you abscond?
left the state.
Did you move to another state?
Yes.
We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But what was the punishment you got for leaving the state?
I believe it was 4 months in jail.
And then when you got out of jail, were you on probation anymore?
I got released from probation if I did the 4 months.
And do you also have a misdemeanor theft conviction that occurred around October 31st, 2011?
Yes.
And what was that about?
A friend had taken something of mine, so I went and right in front of him, I picked up something of his, and I said, "You'll get this back when I get my property back," and he went to the police.
And what was the property of his that you took?
I took a Wii console.
Is that a game console?
Yes.
And what did you do with it eventually?
I was moving, so I didn't need it. I just sold it.
Did you take it to a pawn shop?
Yeah.
And when you pawned it, did you use a fake name or your own name?
Here's my name.
And so you entered a plea to a misdemeanor theft for that?
Yes.
And did you enter that plea and get sentenced in April of 2012?
Yes.
And what was your punishment for that?
Your year's probation.
Are you still on probation for that?
Yes.
I want to take you to around November and December of 2007. And I want to ask you about Elizabeth Johnson. You know somebody by the name of Elizabeth Johnson?
Yes.
And did you meet her approximately around that time?
What was the time?
November, December 2007?
That's not when we met, but yes. I knew her.
Tell me about how you met Elizabeth Johnson.
Met her back in middle school,
About how old were you?
maybe 13, 14, somewhere in there.
And how did you meet Elizabeth?
She's the twin sister of one of my friends.
And Logan, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and try and speak up just a little bit more again.
Okay.
I can hear the microphone picking up and it's kind of accenting, but it's not really carrying all the way back here.
Okay.
Okay?
Let me hold on for a second. Can the jury hear him? Okay, that's good because they're right there, but people out there, including the lawyers most importantly,
Okay.
are probably having trouble hearing you, so just project as best you can. Don't be offended if I say please speak up if you're getting quiet again.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And that's why I'm standing here, Logan, to make sure I can hear you all the way back here, and also let me know if you can't hear me, okay?
Okay.
So you indicated you met Elizabeth through her brother, Robert,
Yes.
and I'm sorry, did you say that they're twins?
Yes.
How did you know Robert?
Through school, he was in the same grade as my little brother, 1 grade behind me.
And so you met Elizabeth through Robert when you were about 13, 14 years old?
Yes.
Do you see Elizabeth Johnson in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Would you please just point out to where she's sitting and just describe a little bit about what she's wearing?
She's sitting over here in defense, wearing a purple shirt.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant?
It shall so reflect.
Logan, eventually, did your relationship with Elizabeth become romantic?
Yes.
When did that happen?
I believe it was sometime after she'd moved back from Boston. Her brother had moved in with me. He needed a place to stay, and she had periodically come over whenever we had get-togethers.
Now, when you said her brother moved in, is that Robert?
Yes.
Well, let me ask you a little bit about Elizabeth's family. Did you meet some of Elizabeth's family members?
The only people, I met her grandmother once, but I knew her brother and her grandfather for a while.
And what name does her grandfather go by?
Bob?
Is his name Robert as well?
Yes.
But he goes by Bob?
Yes.
And what name does her brother go by?
Robert?
Okay. So you said that Robert moved in with you. About how old were you when this happened?
I would say maybe 23, 24, and then probably 22, 23, something like that.
So were you and Robert living out on your own at that point in time?
Yes, I had a house in Scottsdale.
Okay, so tell us about how your relationship began with Elizabeth Johnson to be romantic.
She came over a few times when we would have get-togethers, and Robert just talked to me about maybe going on a date with her and stuff, and hooking up with her, and we eventually just went on a date and started hanging out, and things kind of went from there.
And would it be fair to say that you had a relationship with Elizabeth from then until about December of 2009?
Yes.
During your relationship, did you guys ever break up?
Yes.
Did you ever break up more than once?
Yes.
Did you have arguments?
Yes.
During your relationship, did you and Elizabeth ever live together?
Yes.
Did you live together constantly the whole time, or did you live together on and off?
At the beginning it was on and off, but then after Gabriel was born and everything, it was permanently. Pretty much we just lived together the entire time.
Okay, and we're going to talk about Gabriel in a minute, but let me ask you this. Do you have any other children other than Gabriel?
No.
Have you ever had any experience raising a child or helping raise any other children other than Gabriel?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
My girlfriend, prior to dating Elizabeth, I went out with her for 4 years, a little over 4 years, and her daughter was almost 5. I started dating her when her daughter was 6 months old.
And did you ever participate in taking care of that child?
Yes.
What types of things did you do?
Pretty much everything, to taking her to daycare, changing her diaper, feeding her, playing with her, ran her around. If I went places, she'd go with me places too. It was both my ex-girlfriend and I took care of her.
And when you and your ex-girlfriend broke up, did the relationship stay amicable?
Yeah, we still talk now, and I still talk to her daughter.
Let's talk about Gabriel now. When did you first find out you and Elizabeth were having a baby?
I don't remember exact date.
It was sometime, obviously, before Gabriel was born.
Obviously, yes.
And we had already talked about you going to another state and absconding from probation.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us about what caused you to go to another state and abscond from probation?
Elizabeth and I were living together, and we just decided to up and move. One of our friends lived in a different state, and well, my job wasn't that good here, so I got a good job in Arkansas, and we just decided to move out there. We just picked up and left next morning, pretty much.
And did you tell your probation officer you were leaving the state?
No.
At the time that you left and went to Arkansas, were you aware that Elizabeth was pregnant?
Yes.
And what was happening on the way to Arkansas? What do you remember happening on the way to Arkansas in regard to Elizabeth's pregnancy?
That was when she first started her morning sickness, when we just left the house to go and start driving.
And during that time then, did you have to make any stops on the way to Arkansas?
We made several stops, yeah.
Because of the morning sickness?
Yes.
At some point in time, did you return back to Arizona from Arkansas?
Yes.
And was this before Gabriel was born?
Yes, it was right before that. I believe it was the day before Thanksgiving that we had returned.
Now, you indicated before, we already talked about you getting in trouble, having a probation violation for absconding. Did you eventually get caught when you returned to Arizona for absconding from probation?
Yes.
And you indicated that you had gone to jail.
Yes.
Tell us about what were the circumstances of your jail. Were you in jail for 24 hours at a time?
I was on work furlough.
Okay, what does that mean?
I was allowed out a certain amount of time a day to work, and then I would have to go back to the jail at night time to sleep.
And where were you working at the time?
I believe I was working for a boat air, an air conditioning company.
And what days of the week did you work while you were on work furlough?
Monday through Saturday.
And you didn't work on Sunday?
No, I was held in 1 day a week.
Tell me about when Elizabeth was in labor during that time period.
Elizabeth got induced in labor on Friday, and I was there Friday when they did that, and then I had to go back to the jail Friday night. Saturday morning, I came back over to the hospital and spent all day Saturday there, and then Saturday night I had to go back, and then Gabriel was born, I believe it was around 6 or 7 o'clock on Sunday morning.
And were you able to be there on Sunday?
No, I was held in that day.
You were held in the jail that day? When you were there on Friday and Saturday, were you supposed to be at the hospital?
No,
Where were you supposed to be?
nowhere.
And then on Sunday, you said Gabriel was born?
Yes.
Was that May 3rd, 2009?
Yes.
And then what happened Monday?
Right when I got out of jail on Monday morning, I went straight to the hospital, and that's when I got to see Gabriel for the first time.
And about how long did you stay in jail after Gabriel was born?
I believe it was about a month or a little less, somewhere around there.
And when you were still in jail and Gabriel was born, I'm assuming he at some point went home with Elizabeth.
Yes, I was with them when they went home to the house.
So that day, you went with Elizabeth and Gabriel home?
No, it was, I believe it was maybe Wednesday. She stayed in the hospital for a few days before she actually went home.
And you were there for that?
Yes.
While you were still in jail and Gabriel was at home with Elizabeth, how often did you see him?
Every day. Before I go to work, I would stop by the house.
And what types of things did you do with Gabriel at that time?
Helped her out any way I could while I was there at the house. I couldn't stay there very long because I had to get to work.
During the time that Gabriel first came home and he was a newborn, were there other people who helped you and Elizabeth take care of him? Anybody who babysat him or watched him at any point in time?
I believe it was the first maybe a week or two that when Gabriel was there at the house and Elizabeth went home, one of her friends came over and was there with them, helping them out. Also, my aunt babysat for us periodically, family.
And the aunt who babysat for you, what's her name?
My Aunt Kathy.
And so eventually you were released from jail,
Yes.
and you were allowed to go home the whole time.
Yes.
About how old was Gabriel at that time?
When I got released from jail,
Yes.
about a month old, maybe a little older, month and a half.
And when you first went home and were released from jail, what types of hours did you work?
When I first started for them, I worked till probably 6 or 7 o'clock in the afternoon. If we got a call late, then we had to stay at work and, work late. But then eventually I changed my hours so that I could be home like around 4 or 5 every day.
So eventually you changed your hours so you were home earlier in the evening?
Yes.
Eventually, did Gabriel go to daycare?
Yes.
How old was Gabriel when he went to daycare?
I don't know when he first started. I would say maybe 3 or 4 months.
And how often, or what days did he go to daycare?
Monday through Friday, and then sometimes Saturdays.
And did you ever take Gabriel to daycare or pick him up from daycare?
Yes.
And how often did you do that?
Quite often. Elizabeth and I would switch off, but if I was pretty much getting up in the working and going to work every morning, I got up with him, changed his diaper, and brought him to daycare.
During the time period between when Gabriel was born until about June of 2009, what was your relationship like with Elizabeth? Was it good, or did you have arguments during that time period?
It was on and off. We were good sometimes and bad other times. Argued.
Was there an occasion in June of 2009 where you and Elizabeth had an argument, and then she took Gabriel and went to Boston?
Yes.
What was in Boston for Elizabeth at that time?
Her grandmother.
Do you recall how long she had been gone?
Just a few days.
And while she was in Boston, when she first went to Boston, did you know where she went?
No.
Did she call and tell you she was going to Boston?
After the fact.
After she was there. How long after the fact?
I believe it was the day after she left.
And when you talked to her in Boston, did she eventually decide to come back?
Yes.
And what did she tell you was the reason she was coming back?
She wanted to come back because she couldn't stand living there. Her grandmother, I guess, was trying to sell the house, and her living quarters she didn't like, and she just couldn't really stand to be around her grandmother.
And then during that time period when Elizabeth came back, did she tell you anything about meeting anybody in the airport who might want to adopt Gabriel?
No.
Did you and Elizabeth talk about adoption of Gabriel at that point?
Not really. We didn't talk about any adoption that I can think of or remember.
Was there ever a time let's say prior to December of 2009, were you ever considered having Gabriel adopted by somebody else?
No. We had talked about it and said if we can't really handle this, we will think about it further down the road, but that was the only thing that we had talked about.
When did you talk about it? How old was Gabriel?
When we had that conversation, I don't even know if Gabriel was born.
Before Gabriel was born?
Yes.
And what did you want to do in regard to having this baby?
I wanted to have Gabriel, take care of him. We wanted to have a family.
So after Elizabeth returned from Boston that time, was your relationship on and off again during that time period?
Yes.
Did you continue to have arguments?
Yeah.
Was there a situation where you had an argument and so you had your dad pick Gabriel up from daycare?
Yes.
And let me ask you this, what does your dad do for a living?
He's a retired Phoenix police officer.
And do you know how long he's been retired?
She's been tried for, I want to say 5 or 6 years, at least.
And does he still work for the Phoenix Police Department?
He works on the reserves.
At the time that you had your dad pick up Gabriel from daycare, what happened after your dad picked up Gabriel from daycare?
We got a call from the Scottsdale, it was either Scottsdale or Tempe Police Department, wanting to know where Gabriel was and if he was okay, because Elizabeth had made allegations of kidnapping him, or that my father had kidnapped him. She called the police and told them that.
And after the police became aware of where Gabriel was, did you and Gabriel stay with your dad for a period of time?
Yes.
And about how long was that?
About a week or two.
And did you take care of Gabriel during that time?
Yes.
Did you and Elizabeth reconcile after that?
Yeah, we try to work things out.
Now, Logan, I want to take you to December 8th, 2009. Did you and Elizabeth have an argument on that day?
Yes.
After you had the argument, or at the end of the argument, what did you decide to do?
She didn't want me there, so I got up and grabbed some of my clothes and left.
So you and Elizabeth were living together at that time?
Yes.
Where were you living?
In a trailer home in Tempe.
And whose trailer was it?
It was both of ours.
Was it rented?
No, we were making payments on it.
And so you were purchasing it?
Yes.
And so you said that you left.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in regard to Gabriel that night?
On the 8th, that's when I believe I left with Gabriel.
And why did you take Gabriel with you?
She didn't want him there at the house. She told me to take him with me.
And so you took Gabriel with you.
Yes.
What time of day was this?
Around the morning time, before lunch, because I had just got done. I pulled an all-nighter. I was working at the 99-cent store, and we were stocking, getting ready for Christmas. So it was in the morning.
Let me ask you this. We talked about your work. You said before that you worked at an air conditioning company, and now you say you worked at a 99-cent store.
Yes.
Was that a change in jobs, or did you work at both places at the same time?
I worked at both places, and then stopped working in a boat air and started working at the 99-cent store.
Do you recall when you started at the 99-cent store?
November, I believe.
Of 2009?
Yeah.
So on this particular day, December 8, 2009, Elizabeth told you to take Gabriel and you left. Where did you go?
To my grandmother's.
And where did your grandmother live at the time?
Mesa.
And at the time your grandmother lived in Mesa, what type of place was she living in?
A retirement home.
Is that a place where you and Gabriel could stay?
Yeah, it's like a retirement community. We could stay that night there probably. I never
Were you
asked,
intending to stay there that night?
No, I really didn't know where I was going to stay at that point.
While you were at your grandmother's house, what happened?
We got a call from Tempe police officer. I think it was about 3 or 4 hours after I had been there. And he'd asked me where I was at, if I had Gabriel with me, told me that I needed to return Gabriel. Otherwise, if they had to come and look for me, then I would get arrested. for taking him. So,
And did you in fact return Gabriel?
yes, I asked the police officer to meet me at the house because I didn't want to go back there by myself.
And did he meet you at the house?
Yes,
And did you return Gabriel then?
yes.
And did you have any conversation with Elizabeth at that point?
We didn't really we didn't really talk. I brought Gabriel in and put him in his bed. That was it.
Tell us what happened the next day, December 9th, 2009.
Went to work the next day and got a call from Elizabeth, and she wanted to talk to me. She kept calling the store where I worked at over and over again and wanted to talk to me, and I didn't want to talk to her. She told me on the phone, I picked up the phone one time and I asked her to stop calling, and she said that we need to talk about this adoption and paperwork, and I want you to sign paperwork for adopting Gabriel out. And that was, I think that was the first time I'd heard about it. And she just kept pushing it, and I told her no, and I hung up the phone. And then she kept calling back over and over again, and then she showed up at the 99-cent store.
Logan, I'm going to stop you real quick there. When you said she was calling at the 99-cent store, was she calling on your cell phone or a work phone, or what was she calling on?
Calling the store.
And are you the one who answers the phone at the store?
No, I was stalking at the time. Everybody else was answering the phone. Whoever was the cash register or the manager.
Now, you said you think this was the first time you heard anything about adoption. Had you and Elizabeth had any conversations about adoption paperwork or a couple or anything about adopting Gabriel out at this point?
No.
Had you ever heard the name Tammy or Jack Smith prior to this?
No.
What happened when Elizabeth showed up at your work?
She pretty much just walked through the door, saw me, walked straight towards me and started yelling at me, telling me I needed to sign the adoption paperwork, and just pretty much she was really pissed off, just kept screaming and yelling, and my manager told me to go back to the office. So I proceeded back to the office and went into the office, and they shut the door, and Elizabeth wanted in there, and she just kept kicking, screaming and hitting the door. They called the cops because she wouldn't stop kicking the door.
And at this point in time, when Elizabeth showed up and wanted you to sign adoption paperwork, did she have adoption paperwork with you? Did she ever show you any?
I didn't see anything in her hands when she walked through the door, no.
At some point in time, you said the police were called. What happened when the police arrived?
They took Elizabeth into the back and sat her down and was questioning her. And a police officer came in and questioned me, asking me where Gabriel was and the last time I saw him. And then they asked me about my family. They wanted all my family's phone numbers and who lived in the valley, where they lived. And so we just pretty much sat there that was like the first hour or two that we were there. We just sat down. I made a list. They were asking me everybody, so they could go and check everybody else's houses because they thought that I had Gabriel. And I kept telling them I have no clue where he's at. I haven't seen him.
And at that point, did you know where Gabriel was?
No.
And when you say we were there for the first hour or two, who is we?
Me and the police officer and Elizabeth, and my dad finally came down maybe after the first 2 hours.
And so during this time period, the police were trying to find out where Gabriel is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
At some point in time, did the police allow you to leave the 99-cent store?
Yes. After, I think, at least 6 or 7 hours we were there.
And what happened when you left?
I went home with my dad.
To his house?
Yes.
And did you ever learn the whereabouts of Gabriel during this time frame?
No. I got a call later that night. I think about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. The police officer called me and said, "We can't tell you where he's at. The only thing we can tell you that he's okay."
So they didn't give you a name of where Gabriel had been all that time?
No.
Between December 9th, 2009 and December 11th, 2009, did you have a conversation? Don't tell me necessarily what the conversation was, but did you have a conversation with your dad about adoption versus custody of Gabriel?
Yes.
What did you decide you wanted to do?
I wanted custody of Gabriel. I wanted to have my son in my life and take care of him.
And on December 11th, 2009, what did you do in regard to custody?
Went and filed for custody.
Did anybody help you with that?
My dad showed me how to do it.
And where did you go?
Courthouse right here.
right here, the courthouse?
Yes.
And did you also contact CPS at all?
Yes.
And is that because Elizabeth was talking about adopting Gabriel?
Yes. Elizabeth had just started talking about that, and I didn't know where he was, what was going on, so I called him and told him what was going on.
During, say, around the time period of December 11th, 2009 and December 14th, 2009, did you have any communications with Elizabeth on MySpace?
I may have. I don't remember exactly what they said.
Well, let's say prior to December 17th, 2009, did you ever tell Elizabeth your desires about having custody of Gabriel?
Prior to it?
Prior to December 17th, 2009, a custody hearing.
Yes, yeah, I believe I did.
Did you tell her you wanted to raise Gabriel?
Yes.
And before the custody hearing on December 17th, 2009, did you sit down and meet with Alicia Shumway from CPS?
Yes.
Now, prior to your filing for custody and prior to meeting with CPS, had you ever heard the name Tammy or Jack Smith?
No.
Were you ever specifically aware of a couple who was seeking to adopt your son?
No.
Tell us what happened on December 16th, 2009, the day before a custody hearing.
The day before the custody hearing, I came over to the trailer, and Elizabeth and I sat down and talked. We talked about pretty much that she wanted to be able to get out and do things and go back to school and get a job, and that was, we just pretty much sat there and talked about that. And
Did you and Elizabeth agree on any custody arrangements at this time?
yes, we both agreed that we were going to, instead, because I filed for full custody at first, and then we both agreed on shared custody so that we could have him back and forth, and she would have time to go and do things, go back to school and get a job.
Now, this meeting you had with Elizabeth on December 16, 2009, you said it was back at the trailer.
Yes.
Was Gabriel there?
No.
Did you know where Gabriel was at the time?
I just assumed that he was with those people, Tammy and Jack Smith.
Did you ask Elizabeth specifically about this couple or anything about where Gabriel was then?
I think we talked a little bit about him, so, but not much.
And at the time that you and Elizabeth agreed on joint custody, what was your relationship with Elizabeth like at that particular point? Were you getting along? Were you romantic? What was it like?
Well, at that conversation and at that point, we were both getting along, yes. I pretty much stayed the night and left early in the morning.
Did you agree at that point to get back together or just to have joint custody?
Just to have joint custody.
Then on December 17, 2009, was there a custody hearing?
Yes.
And what type of facility was that? Was that in the courthouse?
Yes.
And you indicated that you left early in the morning that day from Elizabeth's?
Probably around like 1 or 2 o'clock.
And then where did you go when you left Elizabeth's?
To my father's.
And then you went to the custody hearing?
Yes.
Who went with you to the custody hearing?
My dad.
And when you got there, did you go into a courtroom?
Yes.
Was it a courtroom somewhat similar to this?
Yes.
Was it smaller, maybe?
Smaller, a little bit older.
Did it have tables for both sides?
Yes.
And where did you sit as far as the tables for both sides?
I sat on this side, Elizabeth sat right here.
So you each sat on different sides of the table?
Yes.
And where was your dad in the courtroom?
He was sitting behind us in the chairs.
And other than the judge or any court staff, was there anybody else in the courtroom for the hearing?
Not that I saw.
And prior to this date, December 17, 2009, did you ever meet a Jack or Tammy Smith?
No.
And at some point, so you had this custody hearing. That morning, or that day when you arrived at the custody hearing, did you have any intention of making any allegations against Elizabeth to the judge?
Not other than what was already written on the paperwork that we had filled out.
Did you attempt to tell the judge about calling CPS and why you called CPS?
Attempted to, but I really couldn't say anything.
And did you attempt to tell the judge about the whole adoption situation?
Yes.
Essentially, did he let you do that? Tell him about the adoption situation?
I believe I kind of just blurted it out there.
At the end of the hearing, what happened?
They gave us both shared custody, and Elizabeth and I left.
And when you say he gave you shared custody, what specifically did he say? When would Elizabeth have Gabriel, and when would you have Gabriel?
I believe I picked him up every morning on Sundays at 8 o'clock, and then I had to have him, I believe it was Wednesday morning, I had to have him back.
And was there a discussion at all? I mean, this is December of 2009. Was there a discussion at all about what would happen over Christmas?
Yes, we did discuss Christmas, and she got him for Christmas.
And so from your understanding from the hearing, were you supposed to have Gabriel on December 20th, 2009?
Yes.
And that was a Sunday?
Yes.
And so at some point in time, I'm assuming you left the court.
Yes.
Were you ever given any paperwork?
I can't remember if we did or not. I believe so, yes.
On December 18th, 2009, did you have some conversation with Elizabeth about Gabriel?
What day was that?
December 18th, 2009, Friday?
Friday, yes. That's when I called her to make arrangements to pick him up.
And those were arrangements to pick him up on Sunday?
Yes.
What did Elizabeth tell you about Gabriel on that day?
She pretty much just said that I'm never going to see Gabriel again, and that she doesn't have to let me see him.
And what happened after you had that conversation with Elizabeth?
I called the court, told them what she had said.
Did you speak to court staff there?
Yes.
And essentially, what were you supposed to do after speaking to court staff?
They said to just carry on with what I'm supposed to do, go try to pick him up on Sunday, and if she doesn't allow me to, then to come back in on Monday and I can file paperwork.
So on Sunday, did you go to pick up Gabriel?
Yeah.
Prior to picking up Gabriel, did you talk to your father at all about the conversation you had with Elizabeth?
Yes, I believe I did.
Whose idea was it to call the court on the 18th?
I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell you if it was my idea or my dad's. I believe I asked him what I should do. So.
When you went to pick up Gabriel on the 20th, did anybody go with you?
My dad.
And when you went to pick up Gabriel on the 20th, what did your dad provide to you?
Recorder.
I'm sorry? What was the purpose of the recorder?
Basically to record our conversations that I had with Elizabeth.
And what type of recorder did your dad give you?
Just a little one, about that tall, about that skinny.
And was it a tape recorder or a digital recorder?
Digital recorder. Had different things that came with it, like microphones and stuff like that.
So when you went to the home on December 20th, 2009, was this the trailer in Tempe?
Yes.
What happened when you got there?
We pulled up, I turned on the recorder, put it in my pocket, walked up to the trailer and knocked on the door. Nobody was there. And the blinds and everything were open in the house. So we looked in the windows and pretty much all of the clothes and everything was gone.
So you looked in and all the clothes and everything were gone?
Yes.
Did you have a key to get in at this point?
No. No key.
Why not?
I believe I gave it back to her when the police officer was there.
We talked about the recorder. Were you recording this?
Hold on, I think you want to finish.
Yeah, I used the restroom, so I'm not sitting here all antsy.
Okay, so I interpret that as a request to take a quick break, is that?
Yes, please.
Okay, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. So we're going to have you come out, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes. So until then, remember the admonition, and we'll see you in about 5 minutes. Take the chair. Seated, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We left off with the direct examination of Mr. McQueary. So, Ms. Andrews, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, Logan, we left off talking about December 20th, 2009, and I was asking you about going to the trailer. You said you had the recorder. Did you record everything that was happening at the trailer?
Yes.
And we already talked about you looking in the windows of the trailer and seeing the property gone. Did you look at anything else while you were there?
The shed was right next to the door where you went in the trailer, so I looked in there too. And Gabriel's crib and a few of his clothes, and I believe there's some blankets in there too. We're all just thrown on the floor in the shed.
And did you look anywhere else for Elizabeth and Gabriel on December 20th, 2001?
On the 20th, I believe I think I talked to her brother and her grandfather and asked if they had talked to her. I believe that was it.
What did you do on December 21st, 2009?
I think that was the day I went down to court. That was Monday.
And I forgot to ask you, back on December 17th, 2009, when you had the court hearing, was your paternity of Gabriel established by the judge?
Yes.
So on December 21st, 2009, what did you do?
That was a Monday.
Yes.
That's the day I went down and told them everything that had happened. They had told me that Elizabeth had called on that Friday and asked them basically the same thing. I had asked them if she had to follow what the judge's orders were that were set in court. And that's when they gave me I believe they call it the temporary order for custody. It was just temporary until we had our next court date. And they told me they gave me a piece of paper saying if I find Gabriel, then I just show the piece of paper showing that I have temporary custody of him and I can take custody. Or if they find Elizabeth and Gabriel, then I can call the police and show them the paper and they will go get Gabriel for me and bring him to me. But the police wouldn't look for him. I had to look for him myself.
And so you got these documents from the court?
Yes.
And essentially these documents said that you would take custody of Gabriel?
Yes.
After December 21st, 2009, and before December 27th, 2009, did you have any communications between you and Elizabeth?
What were those dates again?
December 21st, 2009 and December 27th, 2009.
Mm-hmm. We may have had one phone conversation on the 26th, but I can't remember if we did or not.
Do you recall if you and Elizabeth had any conversations or if she posted anything to you on MySpace?
I believe she did post things on MySpace to me, yeah.
And do you recall what that was about?
It was about Gabriel, and I believe wanting to give him up for adoption still, and I remember everything what those were about. I remember responding to her on that, I believe. I did, telling her that I wanted to be a part of Gabriel's life and I wanted to take care of him, and I didn't want her to give him up for adoption.
Let me ask you this, Logan. Before you testify here today, did you go back and read any police reports on this case?
Yeah.
At some point in time, did you talk to some police officers about this case?
Like, recently?
Ever?
Oh, yes. Talked
One
to
time, more than one time?
several police officers, yes.
Several times, different times. Are you relying on the police to obtain the information on these records that were talked about?
Yes, some of it, yes.
I haven't asked you to go back and look at them and memorize what conversations you had with Elizabeth.
No.
Have you re-listened to any of these recordings to prepare for this trial?
Yeah.
Have you gone back and looked at any of the text messages to prepare for this trial?
No.
Are you relying on us to get that out some other way?
Yes.
So based on your memory, you had some conversations between you and Elizabeth. I want to talk to you now about Tammy and Jack Smith. At some point in time, did you learn about Tammy and Jack Smith?
Yes.
And when you first learned about them, did you know that Jack was Jack's name?
I believe it was Jackie.
Did you ever believe his name to be Rich?
I think my dad did at first, yeah.
At some point in time, and do you remember how you learned the names Tammy and Jack Smith?
It was somebody gave us, it might have been the CPS worker after they had given me temporary custody of Gabriel. I believe I talked to her, and I think she may have given us the numbers. I can't remember exactly how we got them.
And during the time that you got, well, after December 20th, 2009, when you couldn't find Gabriel and Elizabeth at the trailer, did you then try and find this Tammy and Jack Smith?
Yes.
And how did you go about doing that?
My dad looked up names on the computer, and so did I.
And when he looked up names on the computer, were you able to ever find a phone number for the Smiths?
I believe we found a number for their work.
And did you ever have any telephone conversations with yourself and Tammy and Jack Smith?
Yes, after I had gotten their cell phone number, I got Tammy Smith's number. I had called her.
And when you first talked to Tammy Smith, I'm not going to ask you about what was said, but what was your impression when you got off the phone with Tammy Smith?
Which time? Well, the first time when I first started talking to her, I thought she was a pretty nice lady, and we just had a kind of a normal conversation. Thought she was pretty nice.
And during that first conversation, did you have any indication that Gabriel was with the Smiths at that time?
No.
We'll talk about some further conversations with the Smiths in a minute. But I want to take you then to December 25th, 2009. Did you return to the trailer on that day?
December 25th?
Yeah, Christmas Day.
I believe so.
And when you went to the trailer, what happened there?
That was when I believe I talked to Elizabeth's roommate.
And what was the reason you went to the trailer on that day?
Because I had a computer in the house, and we had a Wii, and my dad and I had been talking. If Elizabeth had looked up any place that she was going to go or something like that, we could look on the history on, because it was my computer anyways, the computer or the Wii to try to figure out where she went. So I went there asking him if I could have the computer and the Wii, and he told me no. He told me no.
Do you know the name of this roommate that you met?
I do now. It's Malcolm Phillips.
At the time, had you ever heard of him before?
No.
Did you expect to see a roommate when you got to the trailer?
I knew that she had moved one in, but I had met him or seen him.
And had you and Elizabeth ever talked about getting a roommate in the trailer?
No.
When you said you learned that she had moved a roommate in, where did you learn that?
Elizabeth had told me when I came over on the day before our custody hearing.
And so you met with the roommate, and he didn't give you the Wii or the computer at that time?
No.
Now, between December 21st, 2009, when you got the emergency custody order, and December 27th, 2009, do you recall any conversations you had with Elizabeth?
I believe we had... What were those dates again?
December 21st, 2009, when you got the emergency custody order, and December 27th, 2009, which we haven't talked about yet.
Does that include the 27th or just from the 27th?
Not
Okay.
including the 27th.
Not other than sending, I think, one thing on MySpace. I believed I got something from her on MySpace, and I sent something back to her. But we didn't talk on the phone.
Now, during the time period after your dad gave you the recorder on December 20th, did you attempt to record all conversations you had with Elizabeth?
Yeah, with Elizabeth and the Smiths.
And the Smiths?
Yes.
And we already talked about the fact that it was a digital recorder. Tell me how you would record phone calls with that digital recorder.
It had kind of like a microphone with a suction cup on the back of it, and I just pushed it on the back of my cell phone when I was talking, and it would record the conversation.
And after recording the conversations, did you go back and listen and make sure every single conversation that you had was recorded on that recorder?
Not everyone, no.
Did you ever play those conversations for anybody else?
None. I think my dad listened to a few of them, but other than that, no.
So you didn't make sure everything was saved on those?
I didn't really exactly know how to work the thing, so I know how to push record.
Is it your belief, though, that every conversation with Elizabeth after the time you got the recorder and the Smiths was on that recorder?
Yes.
All right, Logan, I'm going to ask you what happened on December 27th, 2009. Why don't you start from the beginning with your first contact with Elizabeth that day?
I was at my grandmother's house. Just left my grandmother's house, and I believe I was about 10 minutes away from there, and that's when I got the first text message from Elizabeth. And the only thing she texted me was, "I killed him." And I believe right then I started trying to call her over and over again. And I don't think she picked up right away. I think I got a text message after that. I don't remember what the next one was exactly. But then I got a hold of her, talked to her on the phone. I think just for a few minutes she hung up on me. I think I called back and then we had a conversation.
Logan, I'm going to go ahead and stop you here. I'm going to do this a little bit at a time, okay?
Okay.
Before we talk about the conversations you had with Elizabeth that day, you mentioned that you called her after you got the text message. When, at some point in time, you knew that Elizabeth was gone, December 20, 2009, because of looking at the trailer. Did you have a way to reach her?
I had a phone number, but I wasn't sure if it was hers or not.
Where did you get the phone number?
Jack and Tammy Smith.
So they gave you a phone number for Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think that was on maybe the 22nd or 23rd, somewhere around there.
Now, during the time period from you getting the phone number from Jack and Tammy Smith and, say, any conversations you had around December 26, 2009 with Elizabeth, did you attempt to call her?
No,
Why is that?
because I trusted Jack and Tammy. I had just met them, but they seemed kind of like nice people when I first met them, and they just said, kind of, let us take the wheel. We're friends with her. I know you guys are arguing a lot, and just let us try to handle it and let us try to talk her into coming back to Arizona. And so instead of causing more problems, I let them try to handle it and talk, because I thought that's what they were trying to do, convince her to come back.
Did either Jack or Tammy tell you not to call Elizabeth?
And both of them asked me not to.
And so on December 27, 2009, you received the text, and now you're trying to call Elizabeth. What happened next?
I got a hold of her. I kept asking her where she was over and over again. I don't remember exactly how the conversation all went.
Just tell us what you remember.
I remember asking her over and over again where she was at. And she told me that she had killed Gabriel, and I said, no, she didn't, or no, you didn't. And she said, yes, you made me kill my baby boy. I just kept saying, no, you didn't. And she said, yes, I did. I suffocated him until he turned blue, and then put him in the diaper bag and put him in the dumpster. And I said, no, you didn't. Where are you guys at? And that's basically how the conversation went over and over again.
And where were you when this conversation was happening?
I was in my car.
And this was still on your way to your grandmother?
Yeah, I pulled over on the side of the road, and I was talking to her.
Was anybody with you at this time?
No.
During the time right after you talked to her, Elizabeth on the phone, did you have any other communications with her?
That day?
Right after.
She sent me a few text messages. Right after, because my phone was dying, and I was like, I have to go. I'm going to go. And she goes, why? So you can go tell your dad or run to the police. And I said, no, I have to go. Unless you're going to tell me where you're at, I have to go. And so basically I hung up on her, and I turned off my phone because my phone was dying. And then I drove back to my grandmother's house, and or where she was staying, the retirement home, and my dad was there and a few of my family members. And I said, this just happened. This is what's going on. And they told me, you need to go to the police, like right now. So I went over to Mesa Police Department, which was right across the street, and told them what was going on, played the recording for them, and they turned me away. Told me to go away. They told me to where I lived, and I said I live in Tempe, and they said you need to go to the Tempe police station, and they need to deal with it there.
Let's go back and let me ask. So, you talked about the phone call that you had with Elizabeth and that you were saying to her, no, you didn't, and then you told her you had to go. Why did you do that?
Because my phone was dying.
And what were you, I mean, you were on the side of the road. What were you doing at that point?
What do you mean? What was
I
it?
mean,
Sitting on the side of
did
the
you
road.
immediately get in the car and drive to talk to your dad?
I was already in the car. I just turned around and went straight back. Yeah.
And what? Let's just go when you got to the Mesa police station. You indicate you went to the Mesa police station. Is that because that's where your grandmother lived?
Yes. It was.
And they told you you had to go to Tempe.
Yeah, it was right across the street from my retirement home.
And then did you go to Tempe?
Yes.
And what happened when you got there?
I talked to them, and they said that it'd be about 20 minutes before a police officer could get there, and the police officer would talk to me about what was going on. And I stayed there, and I was the only one there at the time. Waited for a police officer to come. I let him know what was going on, everything up until then, and I showed him the paperwork showing that, I had temporary custody of Gabriel, and I still don't know where he's at. I think that'd been like the fourth time I've been to that police station, too. He listened to the recording of our conversation, and I turned my phone back on to show him the text messages, and he read the text messages, and then about, I would say, 4 or 5 more texts came in, and it was just basically putting me down, calling me a coward bitch. She told me that she was on a flight out of the country, and she would tell me where Gabriel's body was when she was gone. And so the police officer took pictures of all the text messages on my phone. He just put the phone down and took pictures of them. And then we just pretty much sat there. He went in the back and did whatever he needed to do, and we just sat in the waiting room waiting for him to come back out and talk to us again.
When you were there talking to the police officer, did you talk to detectives as well?
Yes.
How long were you at the police station on December 27, 2009?
It was late into the night. I don't remember exact time.
Well, and at this time, with the court's permission, I'd like to approach.
You may.
I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as exhibit number 12. Can you go ahead and pull that out and look at it? It's open here at the end there.
That's my recorder.
And is that the recorder that we already talked about that you used to record conversations?
Yes.
Did you give that to the police on December 27, 2009?
Yes.
Have they had it ever since?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as exhibit number 19. Do you recognize the pictures that are in exhibit 19?
Yes, that's my phone.
Is that the phone you showed the officer on that day?
Yes.
And you testified that he took photographs of your text messages?
Yes.
And are those the photographs you took?
Yeah, looks like it.
You can go ahead and look through. There's more than one page there.
I recognize the text message.
And so these are the photographs the officer took?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Yes. Sorry.
On December 28th, 2009, what happened, Logan?
On the 28th, I believe that was the day that we had to go back to court, the next custody hearing that we had. And I went into court. I believe a police officer came with me from, I don't know if they were from Tempe. Tempe police officer came with me to the court, or showed up there. And they ruled that I got full custody of Gabriel, and I believe they asked in a warrant or something like that to help out with the search of Gabriel and Elizabeth.
And did Elizabeth show up at that hearing?
No,
Did she call in?
no.
During the time that you were with the officer on December 27, 2009, you said you turned your phone off and you turned your phone back on. Did you receive text messages from anybody other than Elizabeth Johnson?
I don't believe so. I believe those were the next few texts were just Elizabeth's.
Now, you said you had had some conversations with Tammy and Jack Smith, and that you trusted them, and they told you not to talk to Elizabeth. Eventually, did you stop trusting the Smiths?
Yes.
And what's the reason you stopped trusting the Smiths?
They just, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. And Jack and I had kind of gotten in a conversation that I didn't like either, and made me kind of change my opinion about them.
Did the Smiths try and get you to sign adoption papers?
They had asked me about it, yes.
What did they tell you in regard to the adoption papers?
They had sent me a text message saying that if I sign adoption paperwork, then they'll fax them back to Elizabeth, and then Gabriel will be returned to them.
So they wanted you to sign adoption papers so you could get Gabriel back?
Yeah. If I wanted to know that Gabriel was safe and he would be returned safe, then I'd just sign the adoption paperwork, and then she'd bring him back.
On December 27, 2009, you gave your recorder to the police officers. Did you ever obtain another one?
Yes, I believe I did.
Did you use that recorder to record any other phone calls with the Smiths?
I can't recall if the Smiths were on there or not. I used it whenever, I don't know if I had any contact with the Smiths after that or not. So, but I still used it to record conversations, yes.
During your conversations with the Smiths, did you ever tell them that you were not interested in having them adopt your baby?
Yes.
Did you tell them did you continue to talk to them, or did you end the conversations?
I ended all the conversations. That was on the 28th after the custody hearing. They'd called me. Tammy did.
And what did you tell them?
I told her that I think she's causing more harm than help, and I don't want her to be, part of this investigation or part of this at all, and that if I figure out if she's helping Elizabeth and the one doing this, and then she's going to be charged just like Elizabeth will be.
Let me ask you this, Logan. Tell me about when you had Gabriel. What types of things did you and Gabriel do?
We did several things. Went on walks together. He helped me out when we moved into our trailer. We fixed it up. We retiled all the floors and did all the countertops, and we built a deck out front and stuff like that. Whenever I'd be doing any of that, Gabriel would be sitting pretty much right there. Whenever I worked on the deck out front, he'd sit out there in his stroller and just kind of watch me build the deck. And whenever I did.
Did you ever play with him?
Yes.
Did you change his diapers?
Yes.
Did you feed him?
Yes.
Did you clothe him?
Yes.
Did you bathe him?
Yes.
In December of 2009, how old was he?
8 months, 7 months.
Logan, when was the last time you ever saw Gabriel Johnson?
December 8th of 2009, when I returned him with the police officer to the house and put him in his crib, and it's the last time I ever saw Gabriel.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Andrews. I think since we're right up to the lunch hour, we're not going to start cross-examination with only a minute or two left till lunch, so we'll wait till after lunch. So we're going to take our lunch break. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break from 12 to 1:30. Please be back at 1:25. Until then, remember the admonition. We'll see you at 1:30 for this afternoon. All right, thank you, everyone. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Hope you had a good lunch. We left off, we had finished the direct examination of Mr. McQueary, which means it's time for cross-examination. So, Mr. Victor, cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge. We have no questions for Mr. McQueary.
Okay, so the defense has no questions for Mr. McQueary. Before we let Mr. McQueary step down, does the jury have any questions for him? Do you have any questions? And remember, if you do, just write them down, or if you've written any down. Any questions from the jury before we let him step down? Going once, going twice. May this witness be excused, Ms. Andrews?
Yes, Judge.
Mr. Victor?
Yes, Judge.
You may step down. Thank you, Mr. McQueary.